It was late September 2003. The light over Yosemite National Park was shifting. The kind of slow, cinematic fade where the sun burns its last gold into the tops of the pines before surrendering to the shadows. Tourists were long gone. Trails were empty. But out there, beyond the chatter of radios and the hum of engines, Ranger Anna Lockheart was still on patrol. The air was thin, scented with resin and damp soil. Her horse, Orion, moved with a practiced rhythm along the narrow trail, hooves muffled by fallen needles. For years they had worked together. She knew the sound of his breathing, the flick of his ears when he caught a scent, the way he steadied himself before crossing loose rock. And then the sound of her presence, in every sense, simply disappeared. At the UC Dispatch Center, Rick Sandoval ran through his usual end-of-shift radio checks. One by one, Rangers reported in. Some voices were faint, swallowed by granite and distance, but they always came. When he called Ranger 3 David, Anna's call sign, he got only static. He tried again, same thing. The silence wasn't just dead air. It was the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Anna was known for her reliability, never missed a check-in, never left a colleague wondering. That discipline wasn't just part of her job. It was part of who she was. Sandoval waited the required 5 minutes, but the clock felt slower than the sinking sun. He tried again. Nothing. The mountains were changing color. The granite domes blushed pink for a moment, then cooled to gray. In the valleys, the shadows thickened into something that didn't feel like just the absence of light. Anna was in the northern sector, a patchwork of quiet meadows, steep ridges, and dense, twisting pines. Few visitors wandered there. It was perfect for someone who preferred the calm of the backcountry over the bustle of the main park roads. That calm had now turned into void. When a ranger goes missing, you don't just lose a person. You lose a trained lifeline in the wild. And in this case, you lose the horse too. That combination, almost impossible to explain. Before the first search team could mobilize, the station door opened and David Lockheart walked in. He didn't need anyone to tell him what was wrong. He read it in the faces of the men and women at the map table. He read it in the way no one quite met his eyes. David had spent decades here before retiring. The lines on his face weren't just from weather, they were from years of reading the land, predicting its moods, and surviving its worst tempers. He stepped up to the map, confirming Anna's route, noting the start time and landmarks she would have passed. No wasted questions, just quiet efficiency, the same way he had taught her to work the wilderness. Then he broke the unspoken hope, still lingering in the room. She's not late. She's in trouble. The words snapped the atmosphere into urgency. Night fell like a drop curtain. Headlamps switched on, cutting thin beams through the dark. The team spread out, some on foot, some mounted, calling Anna's name, listening for the clatter of Orion's shoes on stone. They searched the obvious places first. The riversides, the meadows, the ridge lines where sound could carry. Nothing. No broken branches. No trail of prints. No abandoned gear. It wasn't just like she had left the park. It was like she had been erased from it. By the third day, a thread of information surfaced, but it didn't feel like hope. 2 hikers had been chased by an aggressive black bear in a remote basin miles away from Anna's route. Predatory behavior that intense was rare, but possible. The search focus shifted. Helicopters swept the area with thermal cameras. Wildlife experts joined in. Still, no bear, no signs of fight, and no Anna. When winter crept in, the official search slowed, then stopped. The file was moved to the cold stack. But for David Lockheart, the search had just begun. For the Park Service, Anna Lockhart's disappearance was a tragedy filed under unresolved. For her father, it became a second career, one he never wanted. David Lockheart dismantled his retirement within weeks. The walls of his modest home became an unbroken skin of paper, maps taped edge to edge, layered with decades of cartography, official UC trail maps in black ink, hand-sketched mining routes from the 1800s in faded pencil, seasonal creek beds plotted in blue, game trails in green. He didn't just study them, he added to them. Every time he returned from the wilderness, another fine line appeared. Another note in his precise block handwriting. Rock slide here. Fresh in spring 2004. Stand of aspen. Water nearby. Possible shelter under overhang. The room didn't just look like an investigation. It looked like a war plan. 3 or 4 days a week, David was up before dawn. He'd pack light. Water, jerky, compass, notebook. He avoided the main roads, slipping into the park from side trails known only to rangers. Some days, he bushwhacked through brush so thick it clawed his arms. Other days, he climbed ridges where one wrong step would send him sliding into the valley. But every mile he walked without finding Anna was another mile he understood about where she might still be. In 5 years, the official case didn't move an inch. Then, one spring morning in 2008, someone else found something. It happened in a place no hiker would ever end up, a steep-sided ravine with no marked approach. Dr. Lena Petrova, a university geomorphologist, had led a small team of students there to map soil layers. They'd hauled in a ground-penetrating radar unit, a boxy machine on wheels that looked wildly out of place in the forest. For hours, it showed them nothing but the Earth's quiet history. Then one student stopped mid-pass, staring at the laptop feed. Buried 4 feet down was an oblong mass. Too solid for clay, too smooth for a boulder. The next day, with a permit secured, they dug. At 2 feet, the shovels hit heavier soil. At 4 feet, the sound changed, a hollow thud that didn't belong to dirt. Hands replaced shovels. A curve of bone emerged, not jagged like rock, curved and pale. More followed, ribs, vertebrae, legs folded unnaturally, and there at the ends, 2 rusted U-shaped horseshoes. The scene went still. The air felt heavier, as if the ravine itself was holding its breath. Within hours, the site was ringed in yellow tape. Rangers called in a farrier who had shod every Park Service horse for 30 years. He turned the shoe over in his hand, scraping away rust until a tiny notch appeared, his personal maker's mark. It was Orion. When news reached headquarters, the bear attack theory died instantly. This wasn't predation. This was a burial. Deliberate. Hidden. 5 years after Anna Lockheart vanished, her horse had been found. In a grave someone took time to dig. The cold case files were reopened, and into the middle of it stepped Detective Ira Zola, known in law enforcement circles for dismantling assumptions. She asked to meet David immediately. She'd read his history, figured she'd find a grieving father with a room full of theories. What she walked into was something else entirely. David unrolled his master map across a long table, dozens of pages taped into a single, sprawling canvas. Official search routes looked like a skeleton compared to the dense web of trails David had charted. He pointed to a green line running above the ravine where Orion had been buried. That's a game trail. Not on your maps. Anna knew it. We walked it when she was a kid. For Zola, it was the first concrete path that might lead to the truth. The hunt was no longer just for answers. It was for whoever buried Orion and why Anna's body wasn't there. The ravine became a crime scene. A white forensic tent went up. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and latex gloves. Under the canopy, Dr. Alistair Finch, a veteran forensic anthropologist, oversaw the delicate layout of Orion's skeleton on a blue tarp. Every bone had been carefully lifted from the grave, labeled, and cleaned with soft brushes. Finch moved with the patience of someone who understood that the smallest detail could scream the loudest truth. At first, the bones told him what wasn't there. No bite marks from a predator. No fractures from a fall. No signs of being butchered. It was as if Orion had simply stopped breathing and then been buried. Then Finch paused over the right foreleg. A hairline fracture ran through the cannon bone, harmless on its own, except something inside it caught the light. He leaned closer. In the narrow crack was a glint, a shard metallic and unnatural. Finch retrieved tweezers and eased it out, a speck no bigger than a grain of sand. Under magnification, it wasn't lead, it wasn't steel, it was a brittle, dark gray alloy. Detective Zola examined the fragment in its sealed bag. "Bullet?" she asked. "Not even close," Finch replied. This sheared off something harder than bone. Whatever hit this horse did it with force and precision. For the first time in 5 years, the case had physical evidence that screamed human. While the fragment traveled to the state's materials lab, Zola began turning over the original case files, interviews, patrol logs, citation reports. A name surfaced twice, buried deep in paperwork: Kieran Briggs. In May 2003, Anna had cited him for using a metal detector in a restricted zone. In July, she caught him again, this time with a shovel and a bucket, digging near the ruins of an old miner's cabin. She'd fined him heavily and confiscated his gear. At the time, Briggs had provided an alibi for the day Anna vanished: a dental appointment in Fresno. The deputy in 2003 had checked and moved on. Zola wasn't ready to move on. Weeks later, the call came from the lab. The fragment was tungsten carbide, a high-end alloy used in specialized geological rock hammers. Not a tool you'd find in a random shed. The kind you'd own if you were a serious prospector or an artifact poacher. Zola wrote it in big letters beside Briggs's name on the board: Rock Hammer. The picture was forming. Anna confronting Briggs. Briggs with his tool of choice in hand. A swing born of panic. Now she needed proof. From the outside, Kieran Briggs looked like a harmless small-town eccentric. He lived alone in a weather house on a quiet street, ran a dusty antique shop, and kept mostly to himself. But Zola's background check painted a more complicated picture. He was deeply entrenched in local history circles, obsessively hunting for gold rush relics. To some, he was a passionate amateur historian. To others, a crank who ignored boundaries, legal or otherwise. While the tungsten carbide fragment went through its final lab confirmations, Zola had him placed under discreet surveillance. For weeks, nothing about his movements looked suspicious. Grocery store runs, post office trips, evenings spent in his detached garage workshop. But Zola knew patience could break a case. The wrong man, knowing nothing about being watched, eventually makes the right mistake. When the lab's report landed, it was the missing link. The tungsten carbide alloy matched a model of rock hammer favored by serious prospectors, and nearly identical to one Briggs was rumored to use. It was enough for a judge to sign the search warrant. Dawn, the next morning, a convoy of unmarked cars rolled quietly down Briggs's street. One team moved on his house. Zola led the second straight to the workshop. Inside, the air was thick with oil, sawdust, and the metallic tang of rusted iron. The place was chaos. Shelves stacked with old bottles, corroded tools, pottery shards, and metal scraps. Every hammer, chisel, and pick was tagged and bagged. But no rock hammer with a damaged tip emerged. Just as the team was about to wrap, a specialist from the park's historical preservation office called Zola over to a set of flat file drawers. Inside, each artifact sat nestled in foam cutouts, meticulously labeled. Square-headed nails from the 1850s. Fragments of English earthenware. A brass button with a miner's initials scratched into the back. The historian's voice was low but certain. All of this comes from one place, the old Pinyon Creek settlement, and that's inside the same ravine system where you found the horse. The implications were explosive. Briggs hadn't been a casual relic hunter. He'd been systematically looting a protected archaeological site. Anna Lockheart had caught him there before. If she caught him again, she wouldn't just find him, she'd arrest him. And for Briggs, that meant losing everything he'd hoarded for years. With the artifacts as leverage, Zola brought Briggs into the command post, not a police station. She wanted him surrounded by maps, photos, and evidence boards covered in Anna's face. At first, he repeated the same story he'd told in 2003. I was in Fresno. Dental appointment. You can check. Zola leaned forward. We did. Twice. You had an appointment, but you canceled it the morning Anna disappeared. A flicker of panic crossed his face, the first crack in 5 years. Then she slid a series of photographs toward him. The artifact from his workshop, the ravine map, the magnified image of the tungsten carbide fragment. We found this in Orion's bone, Kieran, and we both know what kind of tool it came from. His shoulders sagged. The air seemed to leak out of him, and slowly, the truth began to spill. Briggs's voice was thin at first, like it hurt him to drag the words out. He said he'd been in the ravine that day, working his secret spot, when he heard Orion's hooves on the ridge above. He looked up, and there was Anna, dismounting, her face set in the grim calm of someone who's seen enough. She recognized him instantly, told him this wasn't just a fine this time. It was a federal arrest. She reached for her radio. "I just lost it," he muttered. "I had the hammer in my hand." I swung. Anna dropped where she stood. Orion panicked, rearing, pulling at the reins. In his frenzy to silence the scene, Briggs struck the horse, too. Panic gave way to cold, mechanical calculation. He dug the pit deeper, rolled Orion in, and covered the grave until the ground looked untouched. But Anna, he couldn't risk anyone stumbling onto her. He knew a place, a fissure in a granite wall, hidden behind a curtain of poison oak and manzanita. A drop, so deep it felt like it went to the center of the earth. He carried her there through the night and let the darkness take her. When the confession ended, the room was silent. Then Zola gave the order Briggs would lead them to the site. The next morning, a small convoy moved through the forest. Briggs walked between two deputies, head down, shuffling like he was already in chains. Behind them came Zola and David Lockheart, who refused to let his daughter be brought home without him. They reached a moss-covered slope. The fissure's opening was nearly invisible, swallowed by tangled green. A rope system was rigged. Gavin, the lead rescuer, lowered himself into black. The air breathed out of the opening was cold and ancient. Minutes ticked like hours until his voice crackled over the radio. "I have contact. Human remains confirmed." Anna came back to the surface in silence. Her uniform was torn, her badge tarnished, but still pinned over her heart. In her pocket was something unexpected, a small leather pouch, drawstring tied. Inside, dried seeds and thistle heads. Miles Corbin, a fellow ranger, recognized it instantly. Anna had been documenting invasive plant species, collecting samples so they could be logged and removed. Even in her last hours, she had been protecting the park. Kieran Briggs was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. His stolen artifacts were turned over to the Park Service as part of an educational exhibit on preservation laws. David Lockheart kept mapping the park, but now he did it as a volunteer guide. When he spoke about Anna, he never began with how she died. He began with how she lived, as a ranger who noticed even the smallest seed in her care. She was protector of the land, and every step she took in those woods was guided by a deep love for the wilderness she had dedicated her life to. Anna had given her life protecting the very place she loved, the Yosemite National Park, standing guard over its trees, streams, and creatures, ensuring its legacy remained undisturbed by those who sought to harm it. David's grief, though never far from the surface, did not become the sole legacy he carried. Instead, he turned his sorrow into purpose. He refused to let the silence of her disappearance define her memory. By sharing her story with others, and through his continued work in the park, David Lockheart ensured that his daughter's dedication to Yosemite would never be forgotten. He honored her not just as a victim, but as a guardian, just as she had always been. And in doing so, he found healing, not in the absence of her presence, but in the preservation of her spirit and the place she had so passionately loved and protected.